Welcome to the Workflow Show. My name is Jason Whetstone, Senior Workflow Architect at Chesapeake Systems. I'm joined today by my co-host, Mr. Ben Kilburg, Senior Solutions Architect. Hey, Ben.
Hi, Jason.
How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Pretty good. We have some pretty cool guests today for the Workflow Show. This is
episode 40.
I'm going to get the number right this time. This is episode 40 of the Workflow Show, and we are going to be talking about today how to buy a DAM or a MAM or a PAM, and maybe a little bit about how not to, and some things to think about when looking at these systems, what they are, what they mean for you, what they can do for you, or what they might be able to do for you, and how a deployment can go well. And that's really our goal when we go into a project like this. It's potentially a huge endeavor for your organization to go through something like this. And we want to talk about what makes these kinds of endeavors successful and how they can also go wrong so we can avoid these kinds of things. So joining us today, I have in the studio at Chesapeake Systems, Jeremy Strootman, VP of Business Development with Squarebox. Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming from
New York?
New York.
Yeah.
And also joining us today remotely is Mr. Bryson Jones, founder and CIO of North Shore Automation in California. Hey, Bryson, how's it going?
What's up, guys? What's up? Wish I was there, actually. This is a fun crew, man.
Yeah, it's cool. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time. First of all, let's just really quickly cover these acronyms that we use here on the Workflow Show and in the industry: DAM, PAM, MAM, WAM. And they all mean somewhat similar things and somewhat, maybe vastly different things. So DAM, digital asset management. Usually when we say a DAM, that's a more generic, all-encompassing term. It could mean a MAM, it could mean a PAM. Generally, it's any kind of system that helps you manage your digital assets. They could be movies, photos, videos, images, whatever. So that's generally a more broad term. So organization, go ahead.
And I'm typically, when I think of a DAM, I think of something that's used corporate-wide. That's a whole lot
Documents.
more assets.
Yeah.
Could be in-baked by the organization itself, by a team in the organization.
Yep.
Yeah, if our audience here probably searching for information about a DAM on the internet, they're going to get a lot of information about how, like, an insurance company manages their PDFs, right, and all their contracts, because that's part of that. And so it's good that you're making these distinction because, the next definition is really probably more what we're talking about here.
Yeah, which would be the MAM, media asset management. Yeah. So generally, we are talking about not so much PDFs. A lot of almost every MAM can manage and proxy PDFs.
Yep.
But primarily, we're talking about the very special needs of our industry. Large files, potentially taking up lots and lots of room on your storage, lots of bandwidth, working with technologies more like SANs and maybe object storage than necessarily maybe network shared file systems and things like that.
Right.
So media asset management is going to be more concerned on the media professional workflows and tasks that you as media professionals are doing day in, day out. Ingest, editorial, delivery, those kinds of things.
Which usually encompasses more workflow automation in the background.
I was just going to say, a lot of times the media asset management platforms, you're going to be talking about things like, what is a proxy? What is my data rate for my proxy? What's my bit rate? What's the frame size going to be? Those kinds of things. And usually MAMs do have a workflow orchestration component. Not all of them do. Usually they have some kind of a hook into some other workflow orchestration. They've got an API, application programming interface, or something like that. SDK, software development kit, something like that. Then we move into PAM, production asset management. So a PAM would be something that is much more concerned with you as an editor getting content into your NLE, whether it's Premiere, Avid, whatever it is, working with it, and then getting that project back into the system. So it's going to be doing things like checking in your project when you're done working on it so that all those assets get ingested into the system, checking the project out in the morning, maybe sharing projects between different members of the group and things like that.
Yeah, and I'll add that it's probably the hardest and most thankless part of the industry is PAM.
That's right.
There's a lot of moving parts. You can build a MAM or an automation in like MAM or DAM, and everything's really consistent, like in a broadcast chain or something, it's all the same. You throw editors and editorial into the mix, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, and multiple vendors. It really does get complex.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. And, also the other thing that we talked about on the last episode was codecs. The PAMs are usually the ones that are tasked with sort of interpreting all those different codecs from all the different, footage, camera companies and all that stuff. So, and then we've got another term which I think probably not as many people are familiar with, which is WAM, workflow asset management, also workflow orchestration, and I just think I like to bring this up because I think it's very important to state that workflow orchestration is really it's not something that all of these systems do or do well. Some of them have some orchestration components, but they might not do such a great job, and then they might also have their own API. And then you've got this system over here with an API and this system over here with an API, and you want them to talk to each other. But obviously, they weren't written by the same company. They don't have the same concepts. So then there's a piece of middleware that you have to develop. And, so the systems that really are a mix of having built-in workflow orchestration and maybe a little bit of that middleware component are oftentimes really cool. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's great that you call that out separately. Because workflow and automation are very different than just getting a DAM or a MAM, right? When you're talking about that, and it's a big deal too because we joke all the time about people getting mad. You get these crazy RFPs, these that have these list of requirements, and sometimes they have things that Jeremy and I talk about the $10,000 sentence. You're like, well, everything's good, and then you're like, oh, that sentence adds 10 grand or whatever to it.
Sounds simple.
It
usually sounds simple, but yeah.
You're like, oh, and then I just want to one last thing, the classic Steve Jobs. The client's like, I want to do this and this, and you're like, yeah, and Ben is sitting there, taking notes, and then he gets to the end and he's just like, oof, like, oh wait, what that? And so it's interesting that when you're designing and doing discovery, that's part of our discussion today is like discovery on this, because part of the deal is that man, you gotta watch for those sentences, right? Because that stuff happens and it gets weird. But at the same time, that's also so often where that's where the rubber hits the road and things really get valuable is when you can do that.
Yeah, so we really don't want to shortchange that discovery process, right? That's such an important part of any kind of engagement with an integrator, or even directly talking to maybe a developer or a company that writes and makes these solutions.
Yeah, that's the hardest part, right? That is the hardest part because it takes a lot of time and dedication. And I can't tell you how many conversations that start out. For those who have experience with us, really trying to dive into that discovery process, sometimes I'll get calls from folks who know our process, and they'll say, look, this one's an easy one. This one's really simple. This one's pretty much plug and play. So no need to ask 10,000 questions. And it's like, no, it doesn't. It's not. You have to put the time into it.
So North Shore has actually been yelled at by vendors, by customers, by resellers for taking too long in discovery, and we wish that people would see that that's pointing to that's actually pointing you to a level of complexity that you should pay attention to, right?
Right.
And now to that, Jeremy, you also know that those of us on this call, if somebody's doing a phase 1 DAM with no automation, you just want to put in a baby MAM, no automation, nothing, get going, you can do that. You may not be completely pleased with it, but you could do a base phase without a ton of discovery. But like I said, you may not be excited by it.
Yeah,
and it leads us to something we'll talk about later, which is those are typically not that successful in my experience, because if you're not really doing much with the MAM, then people are not that excited by it.
They're not going to use it.
Right. Yeah. You're putting resource into it and you're not getting much out. I mean, there's something to be said for building a database of metadata and useful information. But that data is not going to be available to any of your constituents, your customers, your users, and all of that. So nobody can query against it and all of that. There is a time, though, when you do need to fill the bucket, right, full of information.
Yeah. Just shovel it in.
Yeah, but that has to be clearly defined as a part of a phase.
I was going to say we do right, or phase half or phase zero.
Yeah.
But we do find much success with these phased approaches to deploying MAMs. But we have to be very clear about what these phases are going to entail, what we really want to have on day one, and what we are going to sort of push off until maybe next year's budget cycle or something like that. So, it really comes down to the communication and just the clarity in that discovery. Bryson?
So, Jason, let's run down for a second. Let's just because we don't stay too long on discovery, let's run down kind of topics people need to think about that they might not be thinking about, right? Particularly for me, especially if someone's in the post-production or, the video department, they're always going to be talking about their video. They are obsessed with their video and their media, and I got this media, and I have this much, and that's great. But there are things like, what's your IT? Well, first off, what's your relationship like with IT, right?
Right.
Does IT like you? Do you like IT? Like, what's that like? What's your infrastructure now? Are there challenges there? Are there security concerns?
Sorry.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Are there security concerns? All those things that are not really sexy when you're thinking of I'm going to be able to find everything. And like Jeremy was saying, well, you may be able to put everything in, but then are there 50 people that need to see this that are in a remote office, and that complicates things.
Absolutely.
Codecs, as you mentioned earlier. We don't tell you how many times we get into a gig and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, by the way, I've got 40 terabytes of red that I didn't mention, and you're like, okay, well, that's great. Jeremy, think of your, let's just run through the, it's like, not to be negative, but let's run through the nightmares, right? What do people forget? They forget codecs, they forget scale. How fast does this all need to work?
Yeah. Exactly. How fast does content need to hit an NLE before they need to start editing, and then what's the turnaround?
Yeah.
What about business continuity, like backup? And
look at you. Look at you being all Chesapeake with your managed services and everything. I listened to that show. Yeah, no, but exactly, right? I can't tell you how many rigs are out there running. We do a lot of redeployments. We North Shore has a package that we literally call Once More with Feeling. And we'll talk about that later. We pick up a lot of ghost ships, we call them. It's just cranking away in the closet. No one's running it. They're like, what's going on with this one? My favorite one is, I think we have Cat DV. You're like, I literally hear that from customers.
There's a server with a sticker on it that says Cat DV, I think.
It literally, yeah. You're like, this tall guy came one time and told us we had Cat DV, but it's unbelievable. But with that, with the ghost ship, right? Usually that points to one of these things being overlooked, right? And you're like, well, what did you miss?
Absolutely.
What did you miss that made everybody either made everybody mad or made everybody disappointed? Expectations weren't managed, like you said, or they thought that it was going to be like one thing, right? You literally can run this thing. I mean, that's one of the great things and the bad things about Cat DV. You can run Cat DV on a single Mac Mini. And you can, if you want to have I always say this, it's a very permissive DAM for better or worse. So if you want to have a really bad idea, which is running it with no backup, right? On a tiny machine that's, an 8-year-old, Mac or PC or something running with no backup and nobody at IT even knows the thing is in the building, you can do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We would not recommend that anybody on this call, but that's the thing that we sort of try to stop.
You bump into, and there's zero strategy, right? And by the way, there's 3 million assets in the database, and the thing's smoking for some reason.
And no proxies.
And no proxies.
So we're having to generate.
The other thing I want to bring up is what Ben and Jason and I ran into today was. And we're talking a lot about the IT side and the requirements gathering, but who's going to own this thing?
Who's your stakeholder?
Yeah, who's the stakeholder? Who's actually going to be responsible for the success of this thing? And
that's a great one.
Who's going to evangelize it internally in the
to the users, to the people that are expected to use the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who's going to say, guys? I know this seems like
go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, who's going to say, guys? I know this really seems like it's going to be more work, but you're just going to feel that initially. It's going to be a little bit of pain at first. You're going to see the value eventually, and it won't even take that long. Right?
And when we talk about automation, we can talk about tricking people into using the DAM by giving them, automation, right? I use that term all the time. But I just also want to say that if you have a ghost ship out there, like if you have one of these rigs and it was done, don't be embarrassed. It happens a lot. That's why we're doing this show, because this happens so often. And Once More with Feeling, I can tell you this right now, has like 100% success rate. I think we've actually been really successful at going back in, because a lot of times, like you said, maybe your vendor wasn't even clear with you about that. A lot of people got this thing and nobody told them this. That's why we wanted to do this. You guys asked Jeremy and I what we wanted to do, and the first thing we were is like, how not to buy a dam, because we've seen it done incorrectly. And that's not necessarily the fault of any one person or department. It can be a combination.
Right. No, look, as a matter of fact, the industry didn't even know at that point. We are not, so it's not just Cat DV, right? There are other failed dams out there, or MAMs and all of that. And really, we were all discovering this together. The customer had a need, there were products available, and they were sold all in a phase one, and we all took our lumps and learned the process of how to actually do this right. So that's why when we say, once more with feeling, 100% success rate, because now we've done it once, right?
Right.
Yeah, you should also mention that part of that, you bring a great point going back to dam, the difference between dam and MAM. Dam traditionally meant $1 million. It was 7 figures, and it was years, and you got a bunch of dudes in suits from Cognizant or whoever who came in and told you how to do it for $500 an hour, and they lived with you for a long time, right? I joke, I moved out of storage into asset management, and I kick myself every day because you would deliver like a storage system, and you'd be like, you deploy it right, and you're like, it's working, I'll see you guys later. And dust my hands off, and I'm gone.
So I think
we're in with customers for years, we are, and it can be a great relationship if everybody understands that, and we don't want to scare anybody. You can deploy one of these things pretty quickly if you want a simple phase, but ideally this becomes something that becomes so integral to your workflow that you need a relationship like Chessa provides, where you're like, no, ongoing, this thing's gonna help us. In some cases, it's gonna make us money, it's gonna save us money, and that investment that we make is gonna come back to us many times over. And that's one of the reasons we like you guys. I mean, I'll just be straight about it. We have certain resellers who do a great job. You guys, Chessa does a great job. You don't leave. It's great. You're there till everything's done and working.
Thank you,
and beyond.
Yeah, thank you.
Man,
that's great feedback.
Serious.
Appreciate it. So, real quick, if I may, Bryson, talk a little bit about how Chessa and North Shore kind of work together, because some people might think, well, you guys kind of do the same thing, right?
Yeah, well, and by the way, it's funny. It took a long time. I value. There's certain resellers that I work with that I absolutely. I use them as points of pride because I know that I had to earn them, right? There's some West Coast resellers, some Midwest resellers. With Chesapeake, I had to earn it, and I appreciate that. Been going back years. I remember showing our first product, to people at Chesapeake, and you guys have really watched us grow, and I love the fact that actually our relationship has linear grown closer as North Shore has grown bigger and more capable, and as the products came along. But you guys are super conservative, which is great. Like, I literally joke all the time. I used to joke that I've said to my developers, they'd be like, well, we have this thing, it's coming together and getting going. I'm like, guys, I'm going to have to prove this thing to Ben. Like, I got to prove to Ben that this thing works, right? And I don't say that bad. I love that, because for me, I'm the same way. I want to know it works. So a lot of resellers do not have a dam specialist. They can't. They're not scaled to the way to have that. You guys are actually really unusual in that we joke all the time. It's like, you guys actually know exactly what's going on, and we can give you direction and you can do it. It is an unusual skill set. So Chesapeake evolved a lot like North Shore, where you have somebody who sort of learns Cat DV and then maybe go, gosh, it'd be great if we had some scripting people or maybe some developers to help out on certain things. Wow, this person's probably better on workflow design. This person can help with documentation or training. And we've developed that team now that North Shore, you don't get, North Shore doesn't do on-site deployments, and people always ask us why. And it's because, you may have 6 people in your deployment, and each of those people is great at this one part of it, and then you've got project managers looking over it. And that's the same way that Chessa does it. Squarebox does it too. You go in the UK, Squarebox is like, you don't get a dude doesn't show up, or a woman doesn't show up to do it. It takes too much. So that's a big thing. And then the real thing that's really kicked in is, you mentioned the middleware. So making a dam do more than it does out of the box.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And Squarebox is wide open. It's one of the reasons I think probably both of us liked it, is that the APIs are really open. There was no data lock-in. You could get data in and out really well, and it was super flexible, and it's modular. So I know both of our organizations.
Sorry, Bryson, can you
crazy stuff.
I hate to interrupt you. Can you just take a minute
please.
and explain, what do you mean by the APIs are very open? Because I hear a lot of people saying that, and I'm not sure all of our listeners know
everybody says they have an
means.
open API, right? Like I won't mention the vendor, but there's a major and nonlinear editing vendor that's like, we have an open media standard. You're like, really? Then why are you the only ones that read that? and what it really means is, well, it's open if you want to be in our developer program and pay us, So anyway, that's a great point. The thing that we loved about CatDV when we started looking at it for me was that you can fit it into a lot of workflows, but not only a lot of workflows, you can fit it into a lot of infrastructures. So some dams, there's one server and you buy the server and it has the automation. You mentioned the workflow automation and all that. It has all that in one thing. And then, so CatDV has a server, and these are separate applications, and it has nodes that you can then automate with. And so you can add those nodes, you can have a server, they can be separate boxes. The nodes can literally be in different cities. So it's crazy sometimes how we've built workflows really small. And then their APIs are really open, so you can use XML to put data in and out. You have a REST API. They have an original server API. They have command line tools, and so you can scale to a customer. So I know you guys did this a lot. We joke about people being script kids. So we have script kids. We have developers. It's really great that you can have a tech on site who could be like, I'm just going to write a little shell script to do something, and maybe that'll get you over the hump if the budget's small. And then maybe 6 months later they go, that script is great, but troubleshooting it's a little hard. You're like, we should make that into an application. And you can linearly scale with complexity up to something like you mentioned middleware, like a North Shore, connector that might have a complete queuing system and all this stuff in it. That's a really complex app that, really you could start as a shell script and go to a big thing. Mm-hmm. So for us, that's the thing. And you can put a CatDV rig in, and Jeremy's going to shake his head. You can have a CatDV rig that nobody sees. And that's a weird idea, but we actually have CatDV rigs that are running automations and collecting data for people. They're not even ready to use that data yet, but they know they want to capture it. Like like Jeremy was saying, capture the data for a while. We'll sometimes put an automation in that's catching your outputs, maybe your masters. And nobody's even ready to look at them yet, but somebody in post is like, you know what? 5 years from now, I'm going to be really glad that I did this. Yeah. So we have those that are running with 1 or 2 users, and they're just running, but they may have a gigantic automation.
Sure.
So that's kind of the piece of that is that a lot of people's APIs are very difficult to work with, and as you guys well know, Chesapeake doing so many different dams, it makes a difference, and it actually translates directly into cost. If an API or an SDK is expensive to work with or difficult, it will cost you more to develop a custom solution. Simple.
Sure will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sales process, Jeremy, anything on that? I mean, the only thing I was going to say is if somebody pitches you a do-everything system with less than 30 minutes of discussion, you probably know that that's a guess, right? But again, if you just said to us right now, I had a guy call me one time from a reseller just literally yelling at me, I just need a price. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, if you want to do these things, here's a phase 1 and here's a price, right? But I would say to be careful of that, right? Be careful of the rush to close. Right? I mean, it sounds crazy.
Haste makes waste.
Don't be scared of haste. Don't be scared of phases. You mentioned that. Yeah. Some people are like, I literally had a guy go, my boss doesn't want to hear the word phase because that usually means scope creep, right? It usually means, oh no. And we're not talking about that. I want to be clear that I think Chesapeake and all of us on this call are saying, no. Defined phases with defined measurable outcomes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
With reasonably defined, budgets so you know what you're getting into. But I think we could speed that into. Ben, I want to ask you about this a little bit. Do you find that that humans need it phased? Probably the humans using the dam need things phased more than the deployment team or the technology. Oh, right?
Yeah.
We could build a crazy rig, but the humans may need time to understand it and absorb it.
User adoption, right? Change.
Very reasonable statement.
Change management
Absolutely.
And user adoption. And Jason, you can probably drive that question because you're doing the implementations
absolutely.
more than I
You do
am.
all that.
Absolutely. So in this consultation, this stretches throughout a MAM deployment, in my experience, which is we constantly are having these conversations about what can we do. Well, what can we do? What do you want to do?
What will the users do?
What do
right?
you want to do?
Yeah.
What do you want to do with this?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know. We need you to tell us what we're going to do. And it really is this sort of delicate dance of, of how are we going to get this done together? This is our thing that we're doing together. So so all I can say is that's why this sort of initial discovery process and this consultation is so important, because we have trouble telling you what you can do with the MAM if we don't know what you're trying to do, like without the MAM.
It's like
Jason, do you find that customers sometimes like a manager who's not involved, who's just a stakeholder watching it, they'll come back and they'll go, "Don't you guys know what to do?" And you have to go, "Well, yeah, we do, but we also understand that we can, you can lead a horse to water, right? I can tell your users what to do, but they may hate me for it, right?
Right.
And it may never work. So fitting the solution to them is a big deal.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And looking at short-term goals and long-term goals, I think, it's like you never... It's almost like life coaching, a life coach is going to say...
I think this is a great time to bring up that wonderful little phrase that we talk about from time to time on the Workflow Show, which is workflow therapy. We consider ourselves to be workflow therapists, and this consultation is the ultimate workflow therapy.
It really is.
Yeah. Jeremy, this week, on Monday, I literally said to a customer, I said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?"
Yeah, what do you want to be when you grow up?
And he was like, "What?" And what I was talking about is like he had this idea for a workflow that I was like, "Well, do you want that, or does your company want that?" You know what I mean?
Where's this coming from?
Like you said, Jason, will your users do this? Right? Like we get a lot of times the boss is like, "Well, I want to do this," and I go, "Really?" Because I don't think that your users are ready for that. I think they're too, but not like they don't know what they're doing, but they're too busy, right? Yeah. They're like, "Well, I want everyone to tag this with 50 pieces of metadata, every asset." You're like, "I don't know that that's going to happen," right? Because you're in the middle of whatever sports season or whatever you got, right? So I think that's a big one, is that, like you said, the experience, it speaks to the experience of the people consulting, which a lot of people also hate that C word, is that if somebody can't hedge you off, if somebody's telling you that every idea is great, they're probably just BSing you, right? Because
Absolutely.
It's like,
they might just be trying to sell you something.
They need to be.
That's a lot of the difficulty too. Sorry to cut you off there, Bryson.
No, jump in. You have to cut me off. By the way.
That's a deal.
True. Yeah, we've all talked to Bryson before.
Get on it, dude.
Right.
Jump in.
It's a painful part of the pre-sales process, because if we're lucky and we've managed to talk to somebody about a pre-sales consultation or discovery, and we've convinced them to pay for that beforehand, they've seen the value of it. They've probably dealt with this kind of change management process before.
Yes.
So that makes the whole thing easier. However, often people have money at the end of the year. They're trying to spend that money.
Yeah.
The person who's paying for the whole thing isn't part of the team and doesn't really care about the workflow or cares adjacently to the workflow. So what I've found helpful too is if we can add some professional services time to do the discovery as kind of phase one of the MAM deployment, but kind of hedge our bets to say we've covered we know what the basics are. You want ingest, you want delivery, you want search. We're going to put together specific custom metadata as fields for you. There's the base level of a phase one plus some additional discovery on top of that. That's usually how we can succeed in phase one.
Absolutely.
Dude, absolutely. I completely agree. That it triggers a question about another thing about how not to buy a dam. The checkbox at the end of the big phase. So Jeremy and I were just in San Diego together at a sports thing, and this happens in sports all the time because the budgets roll with like a big control room upgrade or something, right?
Yeah.
And somebody will go out and buy like a petabyte of quantum storage or something, some big SAN, and they buy a giant archive, and they buy all this stuff, and then they add on. Hang on, I'm gonna get a little bit of a wacky thing about the phone here. They add on a dam as like a checkbox at the end. They're like, and I have some money left over. I'll throw a dam on there, right? So
kind of like
everybody
me throwing
dumps
that
this
last
huge
burger
deployment
off the dollar menu.
It literally is as if they
Maybe
did that.
Maybe a spicy
exactly,
chicken
right?
while I'm at it, right?
Yes,
because we've done it, right?
Yeah.
And $1 spicy chicken sandwich too.
Right. Yeah, we exactly. No, it is literally like that. You're like, yeah, I want fries with that. And then so the side order of dam that comes with this rig, right?
Yeah.
Nobody cares. Like, but you guys were Ben and you guys were talking about like when nobody cares about it, because by this point they're so fatigued. They've changed everything in their workflow. They've moved all their media, and they're just like, dude, I don't even know.
Whatevs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Just
we
give me,
brought up
just give
recently
me
the
Spotlight
idea.
in the Finder, and I'm happy.
Exactly, right. We brought up the idea recently that we want to try to get, like, especially on these sports gigs, we were like, you know what? I actually want you to, and they're also usually, by the way, in that industry, they're very rushing to get ready for the season, right? So they literally finish the sand like a week before the season starts, and they're like, here you go, guys, get to work. And then everyone's off like, I kind of have like a, like whatever sport I'm doing, I got to go look at. We've actually brought up the idea of asking when they do that, just to say like, hey, do you want to just hold this budget with somebody in escrow, and then when the season's over, we'll all talk? Because if you don't get this now, you shouldn't do it. And people think that's really crazy, but we're like, no. We'll deploy the hardware and software, right? And we'll get that running so you got your stuff, and the boss can stamp it like I got my stuff. And then you literally get like a gift card, for the consulting and the training, because you're not going to listen to me right now, and you don't care. And if you don't, I can't do my job, right? Like my team cannot literally get, we can't do our job.
Or
So,
if you do, we might be working the whole project on scope creep.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's
that's
where everybody loses, right? That's where everybody loses money on the whole deal and all of that. So we call it deployment through support, which is just horrible, because you're really just you're just playing whack-a-mole at that point.
That's right.
You fix this thing, you overcame this hurdle, and the thing still doesn't work and whatever.
Yeah, it's a good point. So that's one that comes up a lot. That one. Can we all talk about blind RFPs for a minute? Can we do that? Like, hopefully, no one listening to this is like trying to do one right now, because it's not going to make you happy. Spoiler alert.
It won't make anyone happy.
And here's the thing: a lot of these platforms, all of these platforms, really, it's this massive mixture of what is software versus what is professional services versus what is configuration versus what is customization. A platform like Cat DV, there's many different ways to skin the cat in the Cat DV. So you can break out.
I know, man. By the way, that was Jeremy. That's like he's in our club now.
Yeah, he slid that one right in. Yeah.
So you've got okay. So Worker Node has the ability to do all these crazy things. So at the very, very high level, if you're savvy, if you're smart, you're not afraid of poking through some menus and maybe looking at a couple of graphs. Pretty easy to put together some pretty simple workflows. If you want to get a little bit crazier, you can do that. You got to read a little bit more documentation, but you can do that. Then there's these just complete custom software development. You're talking about the JavaScript API and the plugin API and all that. And, these are things that, you kind of need to be a developer to be able to do. But some of them can be done inside the platform, right? As customization. You've got these JavaScript calculation fields. Those are actual, those are field types in the actual interface of Cat DV that you kind of have to program to get them to do what you want. So you need to know a little bit of coding. Yeah. But that's not necessarily middleware. Middleware is this other application that sits off to the side to receive data and exchange it between, right? So it really is. It's an
entity.
Right?
It's
like
a huge thing translator.
Right. It's a huge thing to wrangle and define, and that's why it's always a conversation. It's always an engagement.
Yeah, in more and more as Cat DV has scaled into, we'll just call it the company almost in a phase 2 at this point, right? So we've overcome our phase 1 woes of what Cat DV was, which was, I think like a lot of MAMs, you kind of lived in that MAM world and you didn't talk outside of that world, and it was your media asset management tool. What's on your SAN? What's in your archive? Yeah. How do you find it? Can I search it? All of that. As we've moved into phase 2, those things that you're discussing, connecting to all these different third-party applications, other systems that have absolutely nothing to do with media or assets around an organization, that's where we're moving to now, and it always involves custom middleware, the software itself, as well as development and integration.
That's right. One of the things we have been talking about in our space of late is this AI, machine learning, you know, all of these basic algorithms coming in and figuring out a bunch of things about our data for us.
Right.
And that's all middleware. That's all interactions with something out there that's analyzing all that data. But what do you want to do with it? I mean, you want to pull it back into the system of record, right? So you want to get that all back into your MAM. So yeah, it's a really interesting. That's all middleware, just like Jeremy said.
Yeah.
And something going back to your point about the scaling of the system in there, I've run into several people in the last few weeks. There's something I want to watch out for managers. I actually want to talk to the users and the managers in this, and I want to hear y'all's feedback on this. From a manager's standpoint, having, I always joke, because I'm probably older than everybody on the call, I always joke about having the smart kid. You got a smart kid on the system, and a smart kid turned loose with CatDV can do crazy good stuff. Mm-hmm. But you got to be very careful, because if that smart kid moves up and gets a new job or gets promoted, your rig is completely.
You're describing Jason,
right? That's how Jason Whetstone
so
came to
people
work
laugh all the time. Like, I'm always
Systems.
like sort of like warning. If I'm speaking to the manager, I'm like, hey, you're very lucky. You have a kid here who you don't pay any money, who's done $250,000 worth of work for you, right? But by the way, I always tell the kid, hey, be careful, because now you're trapped, because you're the kid that did $250,000 worth of work, and they're never going to let you move up, because you own that thing. Yep. And so this week I was talking to somebody, and this kid's a genius, and I was like, hey man, I mentioned a price for something, and he had a little bit of sticker shock, and I said, I should tell you this. You know, I said, just as a friend, like you said, workflow therapist, I was like, do you understand like that you've done like several $100,000 worth of work on this rig, that if you had someone outside do this would be really expensive. So even if you are lucky to have that unicorn who can do that, the question is, do you want them to do that? Because I know that Chesapeake, I know that North Shore, Squarebox, we're going to document this stuff. Mm-hmm. We're going to have more than one person who knows it. You're going to have continuity, right? You know, you talk about the business continuity. And then the other side of that is that really the best use of that person's time? Right, that's one that I was questioning. And it sounds selfish, because like, well, you're just trying to get us to let you do the work. And it's like, no, if this person is a creative who knows your workflow, they should be doing their job. They shouldn't maybe be learning the worker node or whatever, right? Just get it done, because if you do it right, you only do it once. Mm-hmm, and then it just runs. So learn to troubleshoot it. But I'd love to hear, in your experience, like, are there any nightmares, Ben or Jason? Have y'all run into places where they lost their smart kid or whatever happened? You know, like what do you run into out there with that stuff?
Well, Jason is the
not just
smart kid.
CatDV, but any damn.
No, well,
Mr. Whetstone?
I mean,
Mr. Whetstone was that guy. Now he's got a podcast.
Oh my God, you're kidding me! Like, there's someone listening to this that is super mad right now that I just said that. Like, yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, Jason Whetstone cost me $1 million in employment fees.
Whetstone.
Yeah, exactly. Whetstone. And by the way, let me just tell you this: I'm a Boy Scout, but if I was a ruthless businessman, I would be hiring those kids left and right, man.
Right.
I know 3 of them right now, and I'm like, I can't touch them. But if they ever get fired, they got a job forever.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I mean,
Jason, do you want to apologize to your former boss right now, live on the air, or what do you think?
We've taken good care of them.
No, but it's a business
safe,
thing.
we're
Like you
well
said, you
fed.
got to let people move up.
Right,
You know,
right.
A good assistant editor will never become an editor because they know where all the media is. No one will let them leave that chair.
Right.
Please don't promote Sarah. She knows where everything is. You know, so sad.
No, that's a really good point. But I will say that I feel like the Media Asset Management Initiative at my previous job was a great success, and it's not just because of my involvement.
It was CatDV, wasn't it?
Yeah, CatDV was a big part of it too, and still is, actually. But we also identified the need to bring on a new person into our team whose sole responsibility was to make sure that media got into CatDV in the right format, with the right metadata, with all the right, basically we're not doing the Wild West here. We're not doing everybody has their little scratch space and, we're just going to trust that everybody does the right thing. It's all got to go through this person, whether it's shot footage from a camera card, whether it's being acquired from a client, whether it's stock that we downloaded from some stock site. It all goes through this one person. And that was a huge part of the success because he was great at doing it. He was very consistent. And, just the ability to have all of that consistency right up front meant that nobody really had to worry about it at the end. It was getting done. So the thing that I hear a lot when we do these consultations is, well, who's going to do that? Like, who's going to open up, say, the verbatim logger in CatTV and put the script in and line it up with markers and all that? Like, who's going to do it? Is the producer going to do it?
Job.
Probably
it's
not.
It's a job,
I mean,
right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it was things like that. It was the sort of preparing the assets for the MAM so that we can go back in a year or maybe even next month and find the stuff that we did, right? Because that's a huge part of it. The one question one of our senior engineers asks whenever somebody says, "Hey, can we do this with the MAM?" He says, "Who's doing that job now?" Right?
Yeah.
Because someone has to understand at the end of the day, how does that work? What are the manual steps to get to that result? And that's how we define what the automation is going to do.
If a customer, it's great, man. If a customer refuses discovery, like if we have a customer that refuses discovery, we go, cool, then do it manually first. Right? If this is a new process that you don't do, then you do it manually for a while so that you understand all the edge cases, all the problems that we got to account for, and then we'll talk to you, right? But if you're not going to do discovery about this workflow and really get deep and sit down with, someone like Ben or yourself and really drill in, then we're going to have to see it work. Because there's going to be someone like that Sarah or whoever, mythical Sarah, that's like, oh yeah, when I do this happens all the time, or Frank doesn't send me the right audio every time, or whatever, So,
yeah, one of the things also to be aware of as you're doing discovery is identifying that curmudgeon in the room who has a secure position doing some crazy thing, like rights management. Phil, what do you do for rights management? Phil. What's Phil do?
I thought you were talking about me, Jeremy, the curmudgeon in the room, but I get it.
No.
That Phil guy's a total jerk.
Yeah,
but
rights
you're exactly
management
right,
Phil.
man. Like and knowing, like you said, or even more importantly, love it when somebody says we want to deal with rights management. You go, cool. What do you do now? Like, oh, we don't do that. And you're like, whoa. Then technology is not going to solve that problem, right?
Boom.
Exactly.
You have a basic misunderstanding of like what's going on, right?
Yeah. We have to make sure that we say when you buy a MAM, you're not buying a workflow.
Right.
We consult with you on what your workflow currently is and see where we can apply the MAM to, or the WAM or whatever it is to do that, to help you with that. But the other thing I just want to highlight is this is more part of post-deployment ways that we can keep things in success. We mentioned, making sure that we identify where we need to expand the team. Also, how do we circle back and make sure that in the organization that is, in the actual client organization that's using the MAM, that we are still meeting the needs of the current production. So we get together every week, every 2 weeks, maybe every month, and we talk through, like, how's it going? You had this project. It was a challenge. Tell me why it was a challenge. We have this series of things coming up that we need to prepare for in the MAM. How are we going to use the MAM as a hub of our media for that particular thing? It might be an exception to the rule. Is it going to be a more normal thing? Should we, expand on things?
Yeah.
Should we bring
health
in
checks?
Yes, exactly. Like regular just health checks on how things are going. And then you'll have, some really impassioned people in the group that are going to have some great ideas, and you're going to have some people that just don't want to use it. But it's a good way to sort of gauge, how's it going?
Well, and the thing is I always say that the MAM is never going to be done. The MAM will go through 50 phases, right? So if you don't like the word phase, you shouldn't be in the MAM business, right? But the deal is these tools, especially the WAM tools, as you call them, or as everyone calls them, I guess.
By the way, I've never heard that term.
I haven't either.
So stoked.
Yeah,
Chesapeake uses all the big words. I love it when I get on with them. Like,
It's
really?
acronym.
It's the one that I can dance
Really?
to.
Wham.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's the one that makes
Jason
me
just
dance.
made that up before we walked into this room. Just
did
to
not.
Yeah,
you.
completely.
We're gonna make up a new one.
You guys are just trying to freak me out.
I
You're
thought
like,
at the
wait,
beginning
what-
when you said wham.
am I Jeremy, I remember the day when I knew I was old, and that's when I was on the Chesapeake Workflow show. And Wham. Had no idea what they were talking about. And
I
it was
gotta
time
Google
to hang
this.
up my Spurs.
George Michael?
You get back in my day.
By the way, you're dating me. Exactly.
Yeah.
So wait, hang
You're
on. So
just
you guys
supposed
just
to
hit
wake me up
something.
before you go-goed.
So check it out. Here we go. You hit though. Come on, you're hitting. You're getting close to my jam
I was
here.
on it, man, and I totally lost it. Shit, what was I talking about?
It was a MAM is a living thing. It's a human body, right?
It's a living thing.
ever-
Right,
It's
so
it's
yeah.
never done.
So you're going through all of these phases. Now, these tools are meant to save you time and money, right? They are meant to do more with less, which in turn creates more bandwidth to do more. which creates more, and theoretically, or now you can do more volume so you can accept more shows. So the MAM will create a ripple effect inside of the organization and its processes to, again, change processes in which the MAM has to adapt to those new processes and the new business you're getting. You're going to acquire companies, you're going to be acquired. You're going to acquire customers, your customers are going to be acquired. And that constantly affects the MAM, which then affects the business, which then affects the MAM. So all of this is kind of like a constantly evolving piece.
Right.
Right. And by the way, Jeremy, you handle business development. I want to also say that, not scare people, that doesn't always mean that it's a phase that involves money. When you're saying there's phases, sometimes that's an internal phase that you yourself are doing. Jason, like you're saying, where people. Now, I will say that a lot of companies don't have the initiative to do that, and so they need to hire that in. And that's something that we find ourselves a lot of times. People are like, we know we're not going to do this, so let's just engage in this phase and do this. But exactly, those are things that you guys are touching and circling on something, so I got to jump in because my company is literally called North Shore Automation. We're talking a little bit about automation here, right?
Right.
One thing I want to respond to, Jeremy, just like we're on a debate, is the fact that you just mentioned like making more shows or whatever, and I want to call out, like you said in efficiency, that a lot of times some of our most successful workflows as far as automation are not about actually creating content. It's about delivering or sharing or expanding that content outside. And so, for instance, North Shore, one of our most successful customers is a customer that they not creating or not archiving, but they're actually ingesting and flipping and creating 1 million files a year and sending those out to over 250 outlets around the country. And so they process 1 million files. When we started with them, they processed 38,000 a year with a staff of 4. Last year they did 700,000 with the same staff of 4.
Awesome.
And then this year they're breaking 1 million. And so our point of this is that you may find places that you could put a MAM or an automated workflow in. And going back to what I was saying earlier, maybe somebody isn't just trying to look for content in your team. I often joke that editors don't need a damn because they know where everything is. They made it. But the editor a year later might, right? The new editor will need the damn, and the organization needs the damn, right? So if you're looking for like, oh gosh, where do we start? Well, for me, it's always like, well, what's the most valuable stuff you own? Probably the master files.
Yeah.
Get those in an archive. Jeremy, your acquisition thing, people always fight me. I'll go, hey, is there some way we could divide this up? And they're like, oh, no, we want one big archive. And I'm like, really? Because you make these, pieces, and it seems like this business unit might someday get sold, and somebody's going to ask you for that.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be cool just to give them like 100 tapes instead of like going through and cherry picking it out of your folders, right? I think that's a huge point you made there, is that you do want to be ready to be acquired, or at the end of the day, I always joke at NAB, it's like they always say content creators, and I'm like, everybody's a content creator, but the check doesn't clear till the content's delivered, right? I got friends in LA, I'm in Hollywood, people make a lot of movies, they don't get paid for them. People who get paid are the people who deliver a show, right?
Yeah, right.
And so honestly, we should switch if we can for a minute, because I know we're getting on time and running in. We're talked a lot about like shoveling, what I call eating your vegetables. Let's talk a little bit now about like getting some dessert, which is having the thing do something for you, right? Have it do some of your jobs for you. I'll start by saying that I noticed in a lot of those small deployments we do where somebody's like, no, just get me a dam, just get me started. You're like, great. Nobody cares because like you said, Jason, you've given people another job. You haven't given them a benefit.
Right.
Your company or your organization has a benefit. We know where everything is. But your users are like, dude, really? I got to do this?
This is a pain. This is another step now.
Yeah, I got another step.
Can I just do the metadata later? Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, famous last
Jeremy?
words, right?
Yeah, that's my son. Can I go out and play now? And I'll get to the room later, of course.
Yeah. So you hit one right there. Perfect. So Jeremy and I have been doing this thing recently with a lot of people where you guys, as you know, you do workflow therapy and you go, where's your metadata? And people go, we don't have any metadata. And of course you do. You have spreadsheets.
It's everywhere.
You have job tickets. You have billing systems. You have a project management system. So what Jeremy was sort of alluding to with those connectors, we've been able to say, okay, like I'll give you one, a classic. In a corporate communications department, they have a system that creates a project and it gets assigned to them.
Yep.
And so you fill out a request and it's a work order and it says this is project ABC 123.
Poof,
It
metadata.
has certain data about it. You can put that data into your MAM with an API, and then all the media that gets put into that little container has that metadata automatically.
Absolutely.
So get rid of the idea that like you said, that your whiz kids are going to type everything. What if you just put the base metadata in by automation?
Yeah,
right?
that's a thing, right? Like double data entry is just so painful to me, and I know that if the data has been entered once, possibly by somebody who doesn't even know that there's quote unquote a video that's going to end up having that same data attached to it. It could be an ERP system, it could be a CRM, it could be virtually anything, project management tool. If the data has already been entered, let's automate the process of getting that data into the relevant data into the MAM.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me give you a pull quote. We get people all the time. They're like, "Hey, can we use AI?" I'm like, maybe we should start with a spreadsheet. Right? Maybe we could start with the data you already have before we go, train a magic robot to do something.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's the thing I say every time. It's like it doesn't have to be intelligence. You're surrounded by the intelligence in your own building. You just don't know it's there.
Right.
Again, bringing it back to my son.
We did this for a customer last year where they were doing books and everything had an ISBN, had a book. And so we just took the feed that they sent to Amazon and tag it and put it in. And it's like nobody had to type data. You put one number in and you get 40 fields of metadata.
Right.
Beautiful.
What about your son?
Yeah, man.
Oh, I got a transformer here, some Legos over here, video games over here, and he says, "I'm bored."
Right.
Well, you know what, man? I took my G.I. Joes, a can of gasoline, and all I need is the match, and then we're having a party, right?
Yeah, my dad would always say boredom is for the weak-minded.
Right.
So, Bryson, I just heard you talking about, hey, here's some great things that we can do. How do you guys deal with, we were told we could do this? And Yeah.
Oh.
You know what I'm getting at?
We were told look, North Star Automation built our name by making people mad because they would buy a dam that was deployed, a CAT-DV system was deployed by somebody else, and then they would see or be told what we did with CAT-DV, right? With no discussion of scope or budget or anything, right? Sure. And then they would go, I got flown to New York one time and sat in a room full of people and they said, well, we were told that you do this. And I go, yes, I do. But I did it with a team of 6 people and 3 months. I didn't fly to New York alone and make it do that, right? And that's one of the things that is sticky because you can buy a version of CAT-DV that's under 10 grand, but that doesn't mean it's going to do what a company who bought a $250,000 bespoke deployment does, right?
Exactly.
And so I think that's a big thing that it comes in again, that workflow therapy. Like, can we be clear, how easy? And like you said, can your integrator really make it clear what is good, better, best?
Exactly.
What's day one?
And I think a really good analogies are great. I think the quintessential analogy here is the box of Legos. Like, you go to whatever store you choose to buy your box of Legos at, and you look and there's a picture on the front, and really that picture is just a suggestion. It's just like, hey, here's what you can do with what's in this box. Yeah. You can really do whatever you want with it, with the pieces that are included, but here's what you can do.
And it comes with a guide that shows you step by step by step on how to do that.
But that's where it breaks
thing.
apart a little bit. Is like, okay, so what you can do isn't necessarily what you're going to get with that set, right? You have to do some work.
Yeah.
And somebody has to do that work, whether it's you or the integrator, right? Yeah. So
look, man, they edited Avatar with Avid, right? Well, can I edit Avatar with my Avid? No, right? I don't have the skills of the team, right? That's the direct analogy in our business, right? It's like, do you have a horrible editor or do you have a great editor? And all that. So it's beautiful, man.
Microsoft Excel is one of my favorite analogies because everybody understands what Microsoft Excel is and what it does. But pretend you didn't. Pretend you didn't really know that much about Microsoft Excel.
Right.
And you had this job you had to do that your boss came and said, hey, I need you to take all this data and make some pretty charts for this meeting in a couple of days. calculations. And you're, maybe you're talking to your neighbor and, you're like, oh, I just got this new thing I need to do by the end of the week. And he says, why don't you use Microsoft Excel? And then, he shows you, he brings his laptop out and shows you, like, look at all these charts I made with Microsoft Excel. And you're like, great, that's awesome. You go to the App Store, you buy Microsoft Excel, and you're like, you open up your workbook and it does nothing.
Yeah.
Do you know how many people I have heard say, this man does nothing?
Yeah, this man does nothing.
That's
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, so you have to understand, what is a cell, what's a row and a column, and how should I organize? Here's the thing, how should I organize my data? When should I put it in a separate workbook or sheet or whatever? And when should I put calculations in? And what are those calculations? They look like calculus equations to me. Like, how do I make those work for me? Well, you might need to bring somebody in that understands all of that and can help you do that so you can make those charts.
Yeah. I've
Exactly.
got another analogy, and
of course you do.
If you play of course you do. If you play in the workflow show drinking game, then you're getting hammered right now. So Bryson's point was, every time we come up with a bad analogy, you got to take a shot. So here we go. So I equate it a lot to software sales has kind of, or enterprise software sales oftentimes have put us under this mentality that you pay X amount of dollars for a software seat, and then you pay a maintenance charge which keeps that software current. And that maintenance charge is just a fraction of the cost of the software. The reality is, in a MAM situation, it's more like a kitchen overhaul, right? So I had my kitchen redone recently, and I didn't even know where to start. So I started consulting. I sat with people to consult with them. And I said the same thing that our customers say to us. He goes, what do you want to do with your kitchen? And I said, I don't know. Here's what I'm concerned about.
Definitely want to cook some food.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Definitely food.
Keep it
Put it in a
cold.
walk-in closet.
There should be a place that keeps things cold.
Yeah. Well, so the deal is there was walls I wanted removed that impacted plumbing, that impacted electrical and all of that.
Yeah.
Then I had to buy all this new stuff. I'm buying new countertops, new appliances, and buying the tile for the floor. The reality is that the bill of materials that it took to make the kitchen was X dollars, and the cost of discovery, demolition, implementation, and deployment was that same dollar amount or twice that. Mm-hmm. So if the kitchen was costing me $5 for material, the total implementation was $15 because of the services around it. And you should expect that. You should expect that, because that, in a lot of cases, is what actually makes it sing.
Yep.
Preach
That's
on,
a really
brother.
good point. Yeah. That's a really good
Jeremy,
point.
I have a question to that. Does this mean that you can now write off your kitchen remodel?
Dude.
Is that why you did that? Was that actually discovery research for your?
There you go.
I'm noting this now officially for the feds. So if they call this up, you got me on this.
You're
So
on
good.
all my paperwork as my accountant, so be careful, everybody.
that is a terrifying statement.
Well,
So with that, I mean, I want to say that we've talked a lot of doom and gloom, right? So let's we talked about, oh my Lord, oh this can happen and that
We
can
are
happen and
jaded.
whatever and all. The truth is that the reason we know this is because we've also done it right hundreds of times.
Absolutely.
You're talking to guys who've helped hundreds of companies, organizations do this the right way. We've seen people do it wrong, and probably in the earlier days we even did it we did some things wrong. But the point now is that, and by the way, Jeremy, I should pitch. I love the fact that you're so open and honest about the Cat DV stuff, about history, about the fact that it evolved, that it grew up in a way. The last few years of your product has been it's been inspirational to watch it, because it's pretty solid these days. It pretty blows my mind.
Yeah.
But I will say that it can be easy to do this if you follow these sort of guidelines and if you take your time and you do your homework. Jason, I love the fact that you stress how important the client is. It really is about the client. It's like, you really got to have, it is so much a mental game of a process, and it's not like buying a thing. I think if anybody takes anything away, it's if somebody tries to sell you a dam as a thing, they've probably never done this before.
Right.
Right? It's,
right. Right. or they're just trying to dump it on you and run,
Yeah,
which isn't going
right.
to serve anybody.
No.
Yeah.
But
so
you're
buy something from people you like because it's a long relationship, right? And you're going to talk to them a lot, So hopefully it's fun.
Yeah.
All right, so we've spent a lot of time talking about how to discover how you want to bring a MAM into your organization. Let's talk a little bit about how, for organizations that have already done that and did not have a good experience and are maybe now looking for their second DAM or MAM, because we're doing a lot of those projects right now. So,
or to be fair, also people who have bought it a long time ago and it's time for a technology upgrade, right? It might just be that it's an old thing,
or
live this life.
Things that aren't really even MAMs, like deep archival systems that needed to be migrated off of, all of that. Went with that route, and now they need to move that stuff off.
So considerations there, one that I can think of immediately is how valuable is what we have in that MAM that we're trying to move off of? How valuable is it?
Yeah.
I mean, are we migrating away from it because it wasn't working for us, because it wasn't a great tool, because it just didn't meet with our expectations, because, there's any number of reasons, but is the data in there even valuable right now?
Right.
Have things changed in your organization that much that it might just be better to nuke and pave?
Yeah, is it time for nuke and pave or build and save?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, right.
So,
and even with that, one of the other side of that, the other side is even if you think it might be, sometimes just having the data structured in any way. We do these migrations from archive systems like Jeremy's talking about, and just the fact that the data's gathered in a single place, it has value, right? So we've had people be like, well, we're just going to go back and manually run the whole thing. And you're like, well, okay, you could, but you actually already sort of have a database. So you have a little bit of data. And if you're talking about scale, if we're talking about hundreds of thousands to millions of objects, well, even a little bit of data is probably worth getting, in that way. But that's a big one. It's another reason that when you make a decision, maybe we're pretty, North Shore has a data liberation team we joke about because we have to get data out of some things sometimes that don't want us to take that data.
Yes.
We strongly believe, I know everybody on this podcast believes that the client owns their data. The vendor does not own their data.
Right.
And your data should be available to pack up and go at any time.
Yep.
Someone asked me, it was funny, somebody asked me, what's it like to migrate out of CatDV? And I'm like, well, you can do it right now if you want manually yourself. At any given moment, you can have every record yourself in a structured form that's good. We also know people that make you pay to get your data back. There are DAMs, and you need to ask them. There is a DAM vendor that's tied to storage, and to get your data back, you have to pay them a fee for them to export because there is no export of that data. So with that, I think it's a big deal. But you're right. I mean, I think certainly in the workflow, it's a great chance to go back and say, do we want to continue this path? Or do we want to do that? But then even then, what does it look like to go? To leave. Time considerations. Ben, I know you're involved in some crazy migrations right now, and people need to understand that even if it's all automated, it may have to run in the background for 6 months or a year.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and there's probably going to be exceptions. It's probably going to stop every once in a while and say, "Oh, here's this exception. Maybe it's a value that we didn't account for. Maybe there's a ampersand in the file name, and we didn't think about that possibility when we were writing the migration."
Emoji.
Or an emoji.
An emoji.
Yeah, thank you, Apple, for letting us put emojis in our file names.
But no, absolutely. And so with that is a great. You're triggering great things. There's a lot of people who are like, "Oh, we're just going to do this." We hear that all the time. Oh, we're just going to do this. What do you got? Well, I've got an editor who's just going to do it in their spare time or whatever. First, the mythical spare time for anyone on any staff anywhere, right? Yeah. You're like, okay, I know you're lying when you said that, right there, or And then the second piece of that is like, okay, well, what's that worth though, right? Like you said, what's the data worth, but also what's the time worth of a human to do it? And there are times when somebody has a small rig and we'll be like Jeremy will bring me a migration and I'll be like, they can just do this, right? This is a quick one. They can do a couple spreadsheet import, it's done. But there are times when you're like, they're going to try to do this and maybe they ought to just get a crew because it's not just the human time, it's also just having it done. Like Jeremy, I shudder to think, but he could have done that kitchen renovation. It probably would have been terrifying, but and it would have taken 2 years or longer or whatever, but it would have gotten done. So you always kind of got to look at that where you're like, okay, what is this? What like you said, value of the data, but also value of the human time or the effort to do it, to just maybe let let it show up.
Yeah, and you're right. If I had done that, I mean, first off, I wouldn't have eaten 3 months instead of 1 month in that kitchen.
That's a cost.
And the cost, with that time, I could be making more money to pay for the kitchen in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So, we're currently right now, though, we're working on a rig with Bryson and his team. It's a petabyte on LTO with an encrypted database, and they just... the customer thought like, well, yeah, we'll have to get a guy to just restore this through this application, tape by tape by tape. And right now they're writing an entirely automated process of loading the tapes, pulling the data, proxying it, checking it in a Cat TV.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then, Jason, like you were saying, it'll be something you check once a week, you know what I mean, for a few minutes, instead of you do it every day and run a bunch of tapes and then process. It's just like, no, is it running? Yeah, it's running good. Keep going,
Sure.
So those kinds of things are big in that.
What about feature parity across different platforms? Because I know we've seen certainly consultations with clients where they're like, yeah, we have this MAM, and like, it might be the situation like you mentioned, Bryson, where it was like a kind of a checkbox at the end of a big project sort of thing. So they have it and they've played around with it and they've done some stuff with it. And they're like, it's not really working for us. Maybe it wasn't deployed right, whatever the reason is. But they still have used it long enough to have a sense of what the feature set is.
Right.
And the expectation is, this is a MAM, that's a MAM, I should be getting the same features. And it's not really a consideration of like, well, maybe the paradigms are a little bit different in this platform, this new platform. Maybe they're better. Maybe they're more suited for you. But getting out of that mentality of how that other system works and into this mentality of how the new system works can be a little challenging as well, right?
Absolutely. You get comfortable with something, right? And so having an open mind is a huge thing, right? And I don't say that because it's like, oh, well, this feature is missing or whatever. Even if the feature, like you said, the feature, the funny thing is time changes. I want to ask, do you find that video people, I have a term that I call the cranky old video guy, of which I probably am one now officially, but do you find that the cranky old video guy, and I say that because it just seems to be more of a male thing. It's literally a thing. I find, I hate to say this, but it's like, I tend to find it's there's a prototype of a guy who's been in a machine room for way too long for his career. But do you find that they get locked into a workflow and they're like, this is the workflow? Right? This is the workflow.
I've never seen that, Bryson. No, of course we see it.
I love that. Now, this is what's really funny. Think about this. When most of us started in this business, there was some sort of physical media, and everyone was like, this is how we do it forever.
Yeah.
And then we went tapeless, and everyone was like, okay, well, there's going to be a new way. And now everyone's like locked into these same ideas. And it's like, dude, we only did this less than 10 years ago. Right. So you can't tell me this is how it's always got to be. So that feature parity thing you're talking about, yeah, man, even process parity, right? Like, are we really doing this the right way? Do you really understand object storage? Don't be scared to say you don't, because all of us didn't at one point. Do you understand what's possible with automation? We get people all the time who are locked into an idea, features or workflow, and they will fight me to the death. And I'm like, well, maybe if you just look at this, right? Like, maybe we could save you, 4 hours a day, you know what I mean? Just by doing something slightly differently. So I will say, yeah, man, I think that what you're pointing to for me that I hear is open-mindedness.
Sure. Yeah,
because that's the idea is that, and it doesn't even mean to like us, me, whoever. It means just in general to the industry, can you look around and see what other people are doing? Are you willing? Or are you if you're absolutely convinced that what you're doing is right, okay. Okay, you're writing the check, but know that might not be as good. Just like Jeremy probably got a suggestion on his countertop or something, or an appliance in that kitchen that probably, saved him money and works better. But he might not have known that you can get a dishwasher where you don't have to scrape the plates anymore or whatever,
Sure.
But
it's that
ability
blew my
mind, by the way. The first time I saw that, I was like, what?
Wait, you don't have to wash the dishes before washing the dishes anymore?
Dude, I live in a world where I literally right now I'm going to send this recording off to get transcribed by a magic AI, and I was blown away by the fact of not having to scrape a dish when you buy a dishwasher, right?
Yeah.
Like It just shows your areas of expertise and your blind spots, which we all have, right?
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
it's
look,
this ability to be able to sort of step back and look at the bigger picture and say, okay, I understand what you're saying, but what are you ultimately trying to achieve here? Let's maybe like have an open mind about how to approach that.
Right. Especially like some of these digital media companies who literally went from zero to $100 million organizations by uploading videos to YouTube and uploading videos to Facebook and all of that. And to tell them that they don't you don't have to log in anymore, and you don't have to prep the metadata, and you don't have to upload the video, and you don't have to.
It's a huge challenge, I think, for folks who grow so fast like that, who might be good content creators, but they're not business people. They don't know how to run a massively expanding organization.
Yeah, and it's hard because, look, man, I made $100 million company doing this, so don't come in here and tell me that I don't have to do it this way. This is what made the $1 million. Right?
Yeah. But if you look at it, you're like, well, yeah, but Wells Fargo also used to have everything on paper, right? Mm-hmm. Everything was manual, and that's the way it was. There's a point. It's funny. People question. My favorite thing is people question. We have like these. We'll do these distribution jobs, right, where you're creating an automation to send a file somewhere, and somebody will be like, well, why do you do that? And you're like, well, how many do you a day? And they're like, we upload 2 videos a day. You're like, yeah, well, you're not looking at this, right? That's not you. But we have customers who upload 250 videos a day. And if you go, no, it only takes me 5 minutes. You're like, that's cool. Like, how many minutes a day are you going to spend uploading 250 files, right? Mm-hmm. And the accuracy and all that. So there is a weird question there where you're talking about scale, where you're like you said, every now and then stop. Jason, I love that, you and Ben both, like you have this concept of guiding your customers to this idea, like, hey, can we all just have a meeting and talk for a minute? And blue sky in plain English about what the outcome is. Absolutely. Right? And the pain point. Can we just stop now? Because I know we've done it like this for 2 years or 6 months or whatever, but could we stop and look at it again? I'm undergoing that right now, just to blow Jeremy's horn a little bit more here. I'm undergoing that right now because there have been so many features added to CatDV that workflows we built literally a year or two ago now could be modified and be better. Right. And so, like it's really funny. We're all sitting here, talking about the worker node. Worker 8 is going to make us literally have to revisit everything we ever did because there's certain key features that are just like, oh, we used to have to do this and now we don't, or now we can do that.
Who's going to pay for this?
Well,
that's
but
always
again,
the question, right?
Yeah, but you say, like, I've got a customer right now that, like, I'm going to change all of his workflows on this really complex, painful workflow. But he knows that right now he spends about an hour a day. It's hard to say. He spends about an hour a day correcting mistakes that were made by his users that the worker node in its current version was not able to backstop against. You know what I mean? Right. It wasn't able to prevent because it lacked this certain feature. Now we have this feature that can stop things, from doing. And so, it's like the analogy of like, the carpet on the big roll and it rolls out onto the floor and it all goes on the floor because nothing knows it's spooling. And so this guy's like, oh, wait a minute. He's an executive. He's like, I haven't, not executive, but he's a director level pretty high. He's like,
I'm sorry.
Oh, now I've got
I used to work at Home Depot in the electrical department, which was right next to the carpet machine.
Right?
So yes,
and the dude just runs it.
Do you know how many times people have come up to me and said, "Hey, I need to get some carpet. Can you cut it for me?" And exactly what you just described, because it's not something
There's no stopping the
very
carpet.
much about helping people. Home Depot was all about like you don't say, "Well, let me go get somebody to help you."
You're like, "Let me
try
do
to help
this
them if you can. So yeah, that same thing happened to me many times.
All right.
But so this guy spends his life doing that, and I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, like I literally got a message from Squarebox, and I was like, oh well, that actually just saves this guy an hour a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden he's like, oh yeah, I get 5 hours a week back. Do it right now.
Do it now.
And so it's it. But those are the things that I think that, like you said, we're all talking. This whole thing is sort of about like the value of time, the human interaction of that, and open-mindedness. I think it all comes down to just sort of these plain English outcomes. Can you articulate to us in plain English outcomes and give them to us and give everybody the time to actually then, think about those and what's the best way cost effectively and efficiently to deliver those outcomes in a successful way, and over time maybe you don't get all outcomes day one because of budget or
right.
just human understanding. But
Sure.
I think that at the end of the day, I think what we're laying out here is it's a lot more human process than anybody would think. It's probably the most human involved process other than like an editorial workflow, which is the best analogy I could give.
Yeah, but when you get it right, it works for all entities, different departments, the stakeholders across the entire organization are served by this when it's done right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Jeremy, think about the automation client. Let's call back to the automation client I said that used to do 38,000 files with one, by our calculation this year, with that same staff of 4, they will do 17 years of work.
Worth of work in 1 year.
Worth of work in their 2015 before we started, right? 2015 they did this. They do that. Understand the cost and the money they will make or save from that of doing 17 years work in 1 year. That's the kind of success story that we're all here dreaming of, right? Great if you can double, but I personally myself have been on a project that brought 17 times the output.
And my guess is that this is not one of those clients that called you pounding on the desk saying, I need you to give me the price on a MAM right now.
I'll tell you this is really funny. Actually, it's beautiful you mentioned that too. You're setting me up so well. We got in trouble from the reseller for not giving the number. The competing dam gave the number a week later. And what they did is they gave a high number and 2 years to complete. And we took 3 weeks to put it together. And we gave them a lower number for the next 6 months. And then we stretched out and explained that 2 years to them. And now here I am sitting 4 years later after that with a customer who has had outrageous success. We now work for them in so many other areas of their business doing custom code because of the success of their CatDV project.
That's what you get with Squarebox and North Shore. Put that in your workflow pipe and smoke it.
But you're right. No, they knew that. But I love it because, like I said, the reseller learned a lesson. That rep never. It's really funny. That rep never questions me again. Yeah. And the customer actually said when they came back, they said we know it's a giant company, so they didn't been. This wasn't their first rodeo, right? So they're like, by the way, we understood that you guys actually listened and paid attention because you sent us back a document that said, hey, here's what we're going to do in the next 6 months, and we're not going to promise you the dream and hit you. And so it's funny. We ended up now spending, I think we're almost double what that initial other dam's budget was, but it's been over several years and it's proven value at every turn. Right. So it wasn't a price thing that we beat them on. It was just a clarity. But I will say, I was super lucky because, like I said, we were really getting heat for that. But it's a great case.
But again, you can't do all the things, and a life coach isn't going to say, move to Hawaii, take up ballet classes, and then start doing woodwork and surf. Right. And you can't do all that in 1 day.
It comes back to the idea that MAMs are
but it can be done, and the outcomes can be great.
Yeah. Ben just said,
love it.
Comes back to the idea that MAMs are living, breathing things, if anybody missed that.
Right. They evolve.
Such a hippie, Whetstone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Such a hippie, dude.
More than you know.
Thank you for a hippie.
Well,
maybe Ben. I could see Ben. Ben opens his mouth 4 times in these things, and everything he says is just insanely intelligent.
Yeah, absolutely.
It kills me. I'm just rambling, making jokes, and then Ben just shows up and slays me.
Ben's like Apple. He kind of waits for the right opportunity, and then he comes out with this really awesome gem, and everybody's just like, "Whoa, yeah."
I'm the Diamond Rio MP3 player of this conversation.
That's awesome.
To Ben's iPod.
Well, listeners, you heard it from Bryson Jones, founder and CIO of North Shore Automation. Thank you for your time today, Bryson.
Oh, man, thank you. This is literally the highlight of my day. This is a blast. Thank you.
And thank you also to Jeremy Strootman, VP of Business Development with Squarebox. Thanks, Jeremy.
Anytime I can be with you guys.
So that brings us to the end of our episode today. Hopefully we've helped you with how to buy a dam, ma'am, wham, Pam, whatever you're looking at, and maybe some little tidbits of knowledge about how not to. Thank you for listening. If you have any further questions, we would love to address them, and you can email us at podcast@chessa.com or visit us at www.chessa.com. And I want to give a very special thank you to my co-host, Ben Kilburg.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jason.
Senior Solutions Architect here at Chessa. I'm Jason Whetstone, Senior Workflow Engineer at Chessa, and we thank you for listening. This is The Workflow Show.